If you first dig out a shelter in the earth to block the wind and keep warm, it is called a cave dwelling. Once people learned to farm, they built simple grass huts beside the fields. These open shelters were first used by farmers to rest during work, but later scholars and poets used them for reading and meeting guests. If the shelter could not be lived in for long, people built a small single-room house with walls beside it. This was called a shed. That is why humble homes were later called grass cottage. The famous hut of Zhuge Liang was made from thatched grass, which is why it was called a thatched cottage. When the building became larger, with a main room in the center and side rooms connected on both sides, it became a residence or house. If walls were built around it to create an enclosed private space, it became a courtyard. If several small houses were scattered across the fields in an irregular way, it became a village. Villages and rural communities became the most basic living units of ancient China. As settlements grew larger, with organized houses and farmland arranged together, they became estates or manors, giving rise to names like farm estates and tea estates. To defend against invading enemies, people built defensive walls around them. Settlements protected by walls and designed for military defense were called forts. Famous places, like Tumu Crisis, were named after such fortified stations. If the walls grew tall and strong, with government offices inside to rule the surrounding lands, the place became a city. Congratulations, you've learned the evolution of homes. In ancient defensive wars, horse-face walls were essential for every large city. They allowed soldiers on the city walls to create crossfire. This covered all dead angles below the walls. This design was very effective, but it greatly increased construction costs. To achieve the same effect at lower cost, you changed the square city into a cross-shaped one, with protruding sides. The shape looked strange, yet soldiers at the wall corners could create the same crossfire. This greatly increased the difficulty for enemies to attack. This method protected the walls on all sides, but it did not work well at the city gate. To fix this weakness, you built a strong barbican in front of the main gate. You placed the barbican's gate on the side. You also dug a 5-meter wide trapezoidal moat around it. The moat was cleverly designed. It was only 2 or 3 meters from the wall. This distance prevented enemy siege vehicles from reaching the barbican gate. If enemies tried to break the gate with infantry, it was almost impossible. Even if they breached the outer gate, a thick main gate still waited for them. With so many defenses, enemy commanders usually chose to besiege the city instead of attacking directly. They would slowly wear down the defenders. The city had the surging Yala River on its left side. A Yank River lay to the south. These two rivers made underground water very rich in the area. Defenders only needed to dig a few wells and store enough grain. They could hold the city for 1 or 2 years without problems. You could also dig another 10-meter wide outer moat around the city. You diverted water from the Yala River into it. This created a double-layered moat defense. To let people enter and exit for trade, you built a controllable drawbridge. When enemies approached, you simply raised the bridge. This kept them completely outside. After completing all these measures, congratulations. You have successfully built a super-strong ancient military city called the Eight-Angle City. This city was known as the stabilizing anchor on the ancient Silk Road. In its 1,000 years of existence, almost no one could break it by frontal assault. Later generations called it the Eternal City. This is a small house you managed to get cheaply. If bandits attacked, it would have almost no defensive capability, and your family's savings could be wiped out overnight. So you transformed the house into a courtyard residence surrounded by walls, hoping to block the fierce bandits. However, the walls were too low, and the crafty bandits could still climb over them and enter the yard. To better resist invasion, you gathered the nearby villagers and took advantage of the village's geography, surrounded by water on 3 sides. Within the boundary, you built city walls more than 10 meters high, enclosing the entire village. But if the enemy brought cannons, even walls built from blue bricks would struggle to withstand bombardment. Then you came up with an idea. Reinforce the rear half of the walls using discarded iron pots from the village and strong stone slabs, stacking them into a neatly arranged honeycomb structure. This design could disperse stress, while the iron pots added waterproof and fireproof properties, creating a true wall of copper and iron. Heavy troops were stationed along the walls, and 2 artillery towers were placed on both sides of the city gate. Taking advantage of the village's natural moat, there was only one narrow road leading into the city, making it easy to repel invading forces. When the enemy realized a direct assault would not work, they switched to a siege strategy, setting up camps outside the walls and cutting off the city's food supply. But you had already prepared for this. At the rear, you had built another gate and a hidden inner city, allowing residents to survive, using fish and shrimp from the river for daily sustenance. And if the enemy somehow broke through the gates, there was no need to panic. Inside the city, you had already created a complex defensive network. The city's layout used narrow T-shaped streets with interconnected corridors linking the rooftops of houses. Underground, separate hidden tunnels were dug, making it ideal for guerrilla warfare and forming a defensive layout that is easy to hold but hard to attack, catching invaders off guard. Congratulations, you have built the highly defensive Shangxi Fortress City. DG City, a stronghold as solid as a golden fortress. If it were you, how would you attack this city? This is a city you manage. To make sure people can go home on time, you come up with an idea. Demolish the best houses, build a gate in the middle, and connect the surrounding areas with walls to divide the streets into sections. Every evening, you order your men to beat the drums, and no one is allowed to enter or leave. This is called a fang gate, a typical feature of ancient streets. However, this system blocks economic activity and also makes life harder for people who like to work late. So you remove all the walls and replace the gates with taller and more impressive watchtowers. These towers not only show the city's status, but also allow guards to watch for thieves and keep order. Later, as control becomes more relaxed, people no longer need to take detours to set up stalls. They can open shops directly along the streets. But such beautiful gates are worth keeping. When someone is known for good character, respecting elders and helping others, you can post notices or build an archway to honor them and encourage others to follow their example. Over time, these archways change from practical structures into symbols of honor. If someone passes the highest level of the national exam, the emperor may reward them by funding a special archway built in their name. There are strict rules for these structures. Common ones usually have 4 pillars and 3 openings, while the highest-ranking ones, like those ordered by emperors, can have 6 pillars and 5 openings with glazed tiles. In the end, these ancient archways evolved from practical tools for managing space into important cultural and symbolic monuments. If you could lift the giant wild goose pagoda with your left hand and flick it with your right, you might shake out a hidden inner tower. Shake that one a bit more, and even the wooden chambers inside would fall out. Congratulations, you've just discovered the sacred scriptures brought back by Tang Sanzang. To protect these scriptures, Tang Sanzang even took on the role of a project manager, recreating the Indian temples he had seen during his journey and building them in Chang'an, storing the scriptures within. This was the first version of the pagoda. However, it turned out to be a rather poorly constructed project. Due to environmental differences and weathering, the tower was already on the verge of collapse after just 50 years. Empress Wu Zetian immediately ordered it to be demolished and rebuilt, demanding a structure that could last for 1,000 years. Your first decision was to abandon the Indian style and adopt a traditional Chinese design. But wooden structures are prone to fire. How to protect the scriptures? Simple. Reduce the use of wood, keeping only essential parts like stairs and floors to lower fire risk. So what material should be used for the main structure? Of course, blue bricks, fire-resistant and sturdy. But a new problem arose. Because the bricks were so dense and heavy, the tower couldn't be built very tall without structural issues. Still, this didn't stop you. You realized that traditional wooden pagodas remained stable thanks to vertical columns and bracket sets, dugong. If these structural ideas could be replicated in brick, the problem might be solved. So you got to work. During construction, you added internal brick pillars at intervals and built brick versions of dugong at each level joint. These bracket layers projected outward, improving structural stability, while also shielding the lower walls from rain erosion. Visually, it made the pagoda look even more magnificent. You increased the height to 10 stories and added a finial at the top. Each level had 4 door openings facing the cardinal directions, allowing ventilation, moisture control, and natural lighting. Congratulations! You've just built the 2nd-generation giant wild goose pagoda, but misfortune struck again. Due to war damage and natural erosion, the top of the pagoda began to collapse. More than 200 years later, you returned and simply removed the top 3 levels. This not only optimized the structure, but also coincidentally aligned with the Buddhist concept of the 7-story pagoda. Congratulations, you've restored the 3rd-generation pagoda. Yet again, disaster followed. Around 700 years later, a major earthquake struck the Guangdong region. The finial fell off. Once again, you stepped in, repairing the cracks and rebuilding the finial. To further reinforce the structure, you wrapped the entire exterior with a 60-centimeter thick layer of blue bricks. Congratulations, you've completed the 4th-generation giant wild goose pagoda, the one we see today. It is thanks to the careful maintenance by generations of craftsmen that visitors today can admire the grandeur of the Ming era from the outside and experience the glory of the Tang dynasty within. If you want to capture Datong ancient city, it's not something you can do just by throwing soldiers at it. Even if you send thousands of troops, they might not even reach the city walls alive. At first you hear that the defenders built a row of battlements on the high walls, where archers can hide and shoot freely. You think, no big deal, if we charge fast enough and reach the base of the wall, we'll be safe. Then we can dig tunnels to get inside. But as soon as you order the attack, you notice a large platform sticking out from the wall. This is called a pavilion. Horseface structure. It looks like a dock from the side, and its purpose is powerful. Your soldiers finally reach the base of the wall, thinking they're safe. But archers on both sides of the platform shoot from the flanks, raining arrows down on them. Your army suffers heavy losses. Only then do you realize the pavilion is designed to eliminate blind spots in defense. Even so, you refuse to retreat. But then you see small towers with shooting holes built on top of these platforms. Now, digging tunnels is no longer an option. You grit your teeth and decide to focus all your forces on breaking through the main gate. But outside the gate, there's another layer of defense, a barbican and an outer city wall. Your siege equipment can barely be used, and only a small number of soldiers can enter at a time. Once inside, they are surrounded and attacked from all sides. Your troops collapse immediately. At this point, you start to doubt everything, but it gets even worse. The defenders, still not satisfied, built even more layers of walls outside the outer city. There's also a moat, about 10 meters wide and 5 meters deep, blocking your way. There's only one narrow drawbridge across it. When you charge forward, the bridge is quickly lifted, and even your large siege machines fall into the water and become useless. You might think about using catapults to attack from a distance, but the defenders have cannons aimed directly at your machines. They become easy targets and are destroyed one by one. You consider going around the city, but the enemy already planned for that. If you try to flank them, they will send troops to cut off your supply lines. You may not even get close before losing tens of thousands of soldiers and suffering a crushing defeat. This ancient city is the most important defensive barrier to the northwest of Jin City. At first, people simply piled up yellow earth to form the foundation. But over time, with long-term exposure to rain and water erosion, the walls would easily soften and collapse. They just couldn't hold up. So, being clever, you thought of using stone. Stone not only resists erosion from rainwater, but also prevents termites and ants from eating away at it, allowing the foundation to anchor firmly into the ground. Once the foundation was secure, you used stone to build the walls. However, stone is heavy and large, requiring enormous labor and resources. On the other hand, using plain earth walls wouldn't withstand wind and rain and would easily be damaged by water. So you came up with another idea. Mix yellow earth with fine sand in the right proportions, then pound it repeatedly with a hammer to compact it. This created rammed earth walls up to 2 meters thick. These walls were incredibly strong. Not only could they withstand attacks from bandits, but their dense structure also provided excellent insulation, keeping the house warm in winter and cool in summer. At the same time, the compacted earth was windproof and water-resistant, protecting against weathering while remaining stable and durable over time. But that wasn't enough. Above the walls, you added a steeply sloped wooden roof with wide eaves covered in tiles. This design further prevented rainwater from washing against the walls, protecting the rammed earth from erosion. With the exterior defenses complete, the interior layout was also carefully planned. The first floor was sealed and solid, used to store weapons and defensive supplies for quick response to attacks. The second floor had no external windows, keeping it dark and dry, ideal for storing grain and other provisions for long-term survival. The third floor and above were living quarters, with good ventilation and natural light for daily life. Additionally, a well was dug inside the courtyard to ensure a constant water supply. The entire structure balanced offense and defense. Even under a prolonged siege by bandits, the inhabitants could shut themselves in, remain self-sufficient, and hold out indefinitely. Congratulations, you've just invented Fujian-style fortified dwellings. If you could peel open the Forbidden City, you'd discover a hidden world beneath it, a network of mysterious underground passages. But these aren't for hiding or secret games. They are a carefully designed drainage system. Because the ground is naturally higher in the north and lower in the south, rainwater flows either from north to south or from the center toward both sides. In the end, everything gathers into the inner Golden Water River and exits from the southeast corner, flowing into the outer moat. But here's the problem. Once the ground is paved with bricks, water can't easily seep through. So, When laying the posh stones above the hidden drains, you intentionally carve small notches into certain bricks every couple of dozen pieces. When paired together, these notches form discrete drainage holes, allowing rainwater to pass through. In areas without underground drains, you cut open surface channels, guiding water from different directions into the hidden system. At intersections, you install a round drain cover shaped like an ancient coin, quietly collecting and directing the flow. Next comes the foundation of the buildings. You shape the base bricks so that they are higher on the inside and lower on the outside, allowing rainwater to naturally flow away from the structure. This clever design is called dispersing water. But not all buildings are that simple. The grand halls, like the Hall of Supreme Harmony, Hall of Central Harmony, and Hall of Preserving Harmony, sit on massive three-tiered platforms. These platforms are surrounded by marble railings, which could block water flow. So, you carve drainage holes at the base of the railings. When it rains, water pours through these adverstia and bursts out from the carved dragon head spouts. From one level to the next, streams cascade downward, forming a breathtaking scene known as 1,000 dragons spitting water. But then you notice another issue. Some buildings block the surface drains. No problem. You simply cut openings through the walls, small passages called dog holes. They allow water to pass through freely. On sunny days, these openings serve another purpose. They become cat tunnels, attracting the famous palace cats that roam the Forbidden City. Some of these cats have even inspired characters in games like League of Legends, Wild Rift, and these cats love the dog holes. Sometimes they crawl in and mysteriously appear on the rooftops moments later. Why? Because those openings connect to hollow drainage columns inside the walls. Now, look at the rooftops. When two roofs meet, a gap forms where rainwater can leak through. So you design a jujube-shaped gutter along the seam. Rainwater flows into this channel, then down into the drainage pipes on either side. Of course, you don't stop there. Even the palace walls are covered with protective tiles, known as wall caps. But if a building stands too close to the wall, rainwater from the roof could splash against it. So, you add another gutter, cut small outlets into the wall, and install projecting spouts that guide water safely outward. If a building is taller than the wall, you modify the inner wall cap into a gutter, then open a passage over the wall ridge, allowing water to flow directly outside. From there, it falls to the ground and is once again guided into the underground drainage system, layer by layer, system within system. Thanks to this precise and interconnected design, the Forbidden City has stood for over 600 years and has never once been completely flooded.